Hello everyone, and welcome to our session on in our continuing education series. Thank you to our partners at PhotoWings for doing this program with us. And today we're hosting Mike Davis. Mike Davis is editor, consultant, and writer. He's been working with many photographers for past decades, giving them great insight into their work and giving them opportunity to develop further as photographers. I also would remind our alumni that after this session, they have a chance to apply for the second part of the workshop with you. The second part will be on 25th of October, and their 6 alumni will get a chance to work directly with Mike and edit their stories. So Mike, I will leave the lecture to you and to start this session on editing that I think will be valuable to many of our alumni and listeners. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here. I think VII and PhotoWings are two of the most significant organizations on the planet for photography. And so anytime I can connect with you all, it's my privilege. I'm going to jump right in. I'll start sharing screen. So this is arranged in 2 parts. I'm first going to talk about the dynamics involved in creating more dynamic images, because the link between selecting and sequencing and creating is critical. So everything that should go into the creation of images should be a variable in selecting them as well. Both things I'm presenting today are coming from the book that I came out with earlier this year that Routledge published. This coming from the second chapter primarily, or second section. This is the cover photograph on the book, which for me embodies pretty much everything that I speak to in the book and will address today and become more clear. The core notion is that why you do anything, and especially in photography, is going to determine how you do it. And the same is true in both making and selecting and sequencing images. So the more dimensional you are, the more dynamic the expression you try to make through your photography, the more likely, the more dynamic the images will be. And conversely, the more literal or informational, the less interesting they will be. So that the notion is that the goal is to convey some kind of an impression or an idea or a concept in your photography, as opposed to purely showing the informational aspects of what's in front of you. It's a bit like the difference between writing with adjectives and adverbs as opposed to only writing sentences that include verbs and nouns. Being much more expressive. It's informational photos, just so you recognize the difference, tend to be very similar one to the next, regardless of what's in front of the camera, because you pretty much have to stand the same distance to be able to show the information. You have to arrange yourself in a way and to be able to show the setting and what is happening, the verb or the noun, if you will. Whereas qualitative photographs, those are more impressive or interpretive, tend to be unique to each setting because you're striving to connect with the uniqueness. Early in my career, I worked for a small town daily newspaper, and I would have to photograph 7 county fairs in the summer. And back then I was like, oh my God, I have to photograph yet another fair. Whereas now, with this more qualitative way of thinking about how to approach things, I would have been just ecstatic to be able to go to yet another fair and find its uniqueness and make a unique set of photographs each time. A lot of my time in Portland, Oregon was spent with 5 good friends photographing cyclocross bicycle racing. And the goal in that setting was to try to convey this idea, is what does it feel like for the writers to be? So my why was more about conveying qualities than literally, here's the guy who won, here's the woman who just for the first time in her life wrote, or whatever the specific informational aspects were. Essentially, information puts you in a setting, and your job, your goal should be to convey qualities. In this case, it was a messy day. It was raining throughout the day, and all the tires were throwing up these little like sparks of rain and water, and the writers were drenched. So my hope is that some feeling of that experience comes from the photograph. So how in a given setting do you determine the why in quotes, essentially? I think it's a process of starting by what is the reason this work exists, and what can you possibly speak to? Then engaging fully with the setting and the people involved, you're learning, you're understanding, you're asking questions. I often say that if you have 5 minutes in a setting, spend 4 of them learning about the setting and understanding it, and then spend a minute making photographs, as opposed to automatically raising your camera and banging away and thinking you might get it or you might not. Informed photographs tend to be much more successful. It's essentially what you can speak to, what you can address in terms of more compelling and dynamic aspects of what's in front of you. One way to think about it is always, what are the universal aspects in a given setting? Is there conviviality? Is there passion? Is there dislike, discord? Notice all of those are adjectives or adverbs. So really speaking to those qualities is the goal. And that will then start to tell you when you need to be there, where you need to be within a given setting. It becomes a self-informing process, as to automatically assuming you just go when X is happening or Y is happening. In the book, I try to come up with a way of naming the things that are photography's tools, essentially, and came up with this idea of means of expression. And they are these 5 things. If we intentionally see and realize light in terms of expressing something about the setting and color, and determine from what distances can we make photographs, and then how should we compose a given setting to convey specific aspects of it. And then the idea of moment value is really the realization of the whole process of pushing the shutter. It's not just like the individual peak moment kind of expression. All the work that you did to understand the setting, all the decisions you made in terms of these other 4 things. So if you can say of a photograph, it has really high moment value, it's saying a lot. So the process, I think, when you're in front of something, making a photograph, is first, okay, get a sense of what you can respond to. What is there? What are the dynamics in front of you? Then read the light in the setting. From this angle, it won't work, or that spot's really not in line with what I'm trying to speak to. What you're trying to do is match the expression with the quality of light in a given setting. Then look at the color in the space, and we'll speak to the types of color dynamics and qualities of light more completely. But reading the color in a setting, I think, is something a lot of people don't think about. The assumption is, well, this is what they were wearing and that's what the objects were. But you're in charge of deciding what gets into the frame and what does not. So if you're sensitive to how color dynamics are at play in a given setting, and then play to their strengths as opposed to just accepting what they are, your photographs are automatically going to jump up. Then start with a single distance. From a single distance, I can say these things. Then you inevitably want to make photographs from a variety of distances in a given setting to say different things. Then you compose. Too often, I think compositions are these automatic things. I need to, again, informational dynamics. I need to be this far. I need to show them doing this. Composition is a super powerful thing, and it's not a singular dynamic. Each setting should be composed uniquely. Then once you've done those things, you've thought about, you've worked through all of those dynamics, the goal is to wait for the fruition of the setting to come into play. And oftentimes settings have a rhythm where they start to form and you're making photographs, then they rise and gel, and then you're continuing to make photographs, and then they tend to fade away. So making photographs throughout that rise, crescendo, and slide to the next phase, it's really important, because you don't know ever exactly where the most telling photograph is going to result. We often think it's the peak, I got to get the peak, but as you'll see, it can happen in lots of different ways. So then you just keep doing this process, and as you say, strive to say different things until this given scene is fully realized or it dissipates. A critical understanding, both for editing or making and selecting and sequencing photographs, is that everybody tends to have grown up in the way they make photographs to have defaults, approaches. In other words, the ways that we make photographs without thinking about or making a decision as to how to build the frames, to make the photographs. I've worked with thousands of photographers over the years. Inevitably, almost everyone has some kind of defaults. So I'm going to run through a list of those defaults that I've discovered in people. Probably the most common one is placing elements in the center of the frame. The problem with that is that it is the least dynamic way to engage with something. If your eye automatically falls in the middle, it's not terribly interesting. That's not to say you can't make successful photographs with the primary element in the middle of the frame. But if you do that automatically, and a good test is look at a bunch of your photographs and put your finger in the middle of the screen. And if the primary element very seldom moves away from your finger, that's your default. And you need to work to correct that or change it. In line with that, what often happens is people will produce what I call oval photographs, where you could draw an oval around the frame, and what's outside of the oval is not going to be very important. That too, that's pretty much how your eye sees. So you're still seeing through the camera as how your eye sees, and you need to transition away from seeing as your eye does and seeing as the camera does, because the camera sees everything in there, and you're in charge of everything in the scene. So here's an oval photograph, whereas you could literally draw an oval around that, and it's also centered. Not incredibly successful, and it's essentially an informational photograph. This is what informational photographs tend to look like. Whereas here's the same scene, same action, same verb, and yet for me it's a much more dynamic realization of the setting. You can travel throughout the frame. The top left is important, top right, bottom right, left, right. Every part of the frame there's spatial geometry, there is relationships between elements, the light dynamics are strong. So another thing to be aware of, started to think about this more specifically in the last couple of years, but how often are you putting yourself parallel to what is happening as opposed to being at an angle? And a similar dynamic is only photographing one plane of a setting, not thinking about what's in the foreground and not fully replacing elements behind that one plane progressively. So like, here's a one plane photograph. It's okay to the extent that it's okay, and it does benefit from nice light and there's a good color dynamic, but it's not terribly engaging beyond that one plane. Here's the same setting, just a couple hours later, photographed at an angle, and there is so much more to respond to. It's a bit of a no clear starting point. It's more of a get to explore it kind of photograph and find lots of different moments, which wouldn't have worked if I had stayed parallel to this setting. All of these photographs are ones I've made, so I can speak to the making and how they fit into the dynamics I'm talking about. Another thing that often gets done, especially in cropping, is where you crop everything down to close to the edge. And the danger of that is that, like this photograph, it's just static. And when you put people near the edge of the frame or critical things, that creates pinch points where your eye travels up there and gets caught. It's just no fluidity, as opposed to this, where they get to exist within a space. You have a better sense of the dynamics of where they work. Still a portrait, so there's an activity to be engaged with, but just the spatial dynamics. And it works whether you're photographing people or objects, just like this. Not terribly interesting. Whereas just giving it a little space to breathe is a much more engaging photograph, I find. Some people too will only see parts of the frame or will not see parts of the frame. Not unusual for you to make square photographs. So if you find that you can crop your photographs to squares fairly often and they are stronger, then you need to push the seeing out again, seeing more as the camera does, unless your goal is to make square photographs. Another dynamic is not seeing one edge, and it can be left or right. That often happens because you're so focused on getting the activity in the frame that you get the activity, but then that leaves this bunch of space over on the far right or the far left. Equally, you can not see the top or the bottom. A variable of this is some people build the frame from the bottom upward, others build it from left over or right over. Those I call diving board photos. And some people, very rare, but some people even build the frame from top down. The goal obviously is to build the entire frame equally, both foreground, middle ground, background, further background. And a not uncommon thing too is splitting the frame. So here's a photograph that does everything I just talked about. It's terrible. So there it's split down the middle, it's split horizontally. It's an oval photograph that is one plane. It doesn't fully realize the right 1/5 of the frame. It's just awful. And yet this is what a lot of photographs look like, because the goal is to show people doing stuff. If on the other hand, in this setting, I turned around and saw this happening and then made a much more specific composition, much more spatial relationship within this setting, same activity, but a very different kind of photograph. So I'm going to run through now those dynamics that I talked about a little more. And again, whether you're making photographs or responding to those in selecting and sequencing, these dynamics are extremely important to respond to. So I think of light's superpowers, like I always say, this is our cat Blue, who passed away not long ago. So I just like seeing him, but He could find the light anywhere. So you need to be like a cat and see the light wherever it is. The dynamics for light are in there, its temperature, warm or cool, or tint, or the way that it represents a scene or creates color within a scene, essentially through its temperature. Its angularity, is it behind you? Is it to your right, to your left? Or often the strongest is backlit, as this photograph is. And then the brightness and the ratio of the scene. In this case, incredible ratio between bright and dark. And you're in charge of all of these things in the seeing. So speaking to color temperature, here's the same scene with two different color temperatures, just different times of the day. This is in the morning as the sun was coming through, warmer, cooler. So what do you want to convey? A more cool, like, God, I hate ironing. I do. Well, that would be the cool thing. Or, God, ironing is like the best thing on the planet. I love to iron. Let me jump in there. Temperature is a powerful thing. This photograph in the Grand Canyon at daybreak. So both color temperatures represented. So the dynamics of color play out in a single photograph, opposite of each other. Just kind of a play on color, two sides of the food processing process. So you can introduce color temperature into a setting, as in this cooler, literally a locker, and then food being a much more warmer. And this was for a story on Thanksgiving. So even getting together with family and friends and everything, focus on the food itself. So color temperature. Here's an important thing to understand. I often have heard photographers say, oh, the light sucked. I couldn't make a picture. And the problem with that expression is that you were trying to make a photograph that was against the light that existed. You didn't fully realize or understand the light dynamic in that setting, and we're trying to make some kind of picture that wasn't possible. So I don't think light is either good or bad. It just either matches what you're trying to convey. In this case, this bike was at Syracuse University, tied onto this pole for 3 or 4 years. And I made tons of photographs of it until one night in the dead of winter, I was walking home and saw this quality of light. I was like, that's it. It's so sad that it has to sit there. And its owner, and I think, had traveled to London and just said, the heck with it, I'm leaving it. Being in settings, looking for where the light is the magic quality. In this case, the light was raking across this trail for maybe 10 minutes. And I suspected it might happen as the sun rose up into the setting. So I waited probably 20 minutes until it was there, then waited for writers to go through the setting. And it was only this coming together, this fruition of the scene, that produced that kind of feeling. Nothing say like midday or like harsh light. Oh, you can't make decent pictures in that, unless that's the point. It's trying to convey the sort of roughness of this setting. And this was just a couple of weeks ago in Nebraska, and it was hot, unusually hot in that setting. It was super hard work harvesting soybeans, and the quality of light was just right to add to that sense of hard work and the setting. Color, or if you're in black and white, tone and other dynamics. Again, what are you trying to convey through the seeing of color is the question you should always be asking yourself. Color's superpowers. Color directs the eye, and you can use that well or not. Figure anything red in the scene is probably going to be where people will start looking. So if you do have red in the scene, you better want people to look there. Same for dynamics of black and yellow. It creates separation within settings, as you saw in that Grand Canyon photograph. It was the orange against the blue. The orange came out from the scene and the blue receded. It can also elicit an emotive response. The chaos or the warmth or the coolness or the whatever dynamics of color creates a mood that people feel when they look at the photograph. So here's an example. Like, I've asked a bunch of people, where does your eye start in this photograph? And most people say in that orange banner. And it's like, yep, that is not where you would want to start. So what about now? Chances are it starts on the bicycle rider on the near left or near right, and then travels throughout the rest of the scene with a better hierarchy than the color version. It's because this photograph was made in black and white. Here too, the idea, like making sure that every part of that background was active and everything fell into place, was part of this composition and seeing of the setting. Waiting for the color to fall into place is an important thing. Like the sense of fall that was coming from the setting only worked if the writers popped from the setting. So knowing that yellows and blues are opposites on the color wheel, and therefore anything blue would have popped, whereas an orange or a red, the writers would have tended to blend into it. Sometimes a scene is just so chaotic of color, and you can use that to add to the sense of what's going on, the sense of chaos. But even here, I saw the dynamics of the lime green colors, where there are 3 blotches of lime green colors, so angling those. There are also dynamics of 3 in the purple colors and the yellow. In this case, putting the scoreboard exactly where it was and putting the bleachers exactly where they were was equally important to the scene of color. I always suggest you read the light, then the color again. So here's a photographing a winery in Oregon, and this building was significant in that the owners drew about 90% of the materials from that building from the property and from their winemaking. And that thing is held up by these pillars, these trees, literally logs. And there was only one of about, I don't know, at least 50 of these where the light and the color came together to have this sense of strength and power. And then the stone came from the property, and the slats on that wall are actually from wine barrels. So informationally, it has a lot of information, but the hope is that you feel some sense of strength and creativity from the photograph. Here's an example, thinking, well, he's facing forward, I got to see him. And that means I have to compromise light. I have to probably compromise color. The background doesn't work. But what if you said, no, I got to start with the light and make sure the light works and then wait for the color and other things to fall into place. So exact same within 5 minutes of that last photograph, and just waited for everything to fall into place. The tonality had a much better feel once the light was established. Distance is probably the single variable that people don't think about fully. And it's, I wish I could hear your responses, like the sense of how does distance affect what you feel from a given photograph. And again, the question you should be asking you, what can I speak to by varying the distance, by determining here's where I need to start to make a photograph. Just an example, the goal was to photograph these cyclocross riders often got just filthy. And this photograph was made with a 85 millimeter lens from 3-4 feet away. And it feels like, whoa, God, he's kind of caked in mud. Whoa. This photograph was made from about 1.5 feet away with a 35 millimeter lens. And for me, the grittiness and yet the sense of exuberance and fun that comes from this photograph is much stronger than this one. So distance is the most important variable. Not surprisingly, then focal length and depth of field and other technical aspects fall into place as well. So distance isn't a singular dynamic. You have to incorporate all of the other aspects of making photographs as you change the distance from the setting. It's also important if you're building narratives. Imagine if you're selecting from a set of photographs and they're all made from the same distance. Creating a dynamic sequence from that is going to be very difficult. So here's often I encourage you to always make, okay, what's the furthest away photograph from this setting that I can make qualitatively? In this case, this man was out wildcrafting. He was collecting mushrooms in the forest. So giving a sense of the loneness. It was also just on the cusp of winter, and it was just a beautiful, chill day and a super experience. And he had found this specific type of mushroom, and he was surprised by that. So it's trying to make a photograph to convey that sense of energy and the discordance of it by doing a sort of off-kilter composition. And then as close as possible to give a sense, a feel for the beauty and the sort of quietness of these mushrooms and the connection to him. Did a series on people who make bikes by hand. And I approached each one knowing the distance was going to be a super important dynamic. So always making the widest scene possible to let you feel what their workspace felt like. That middle distance, this is what I call the verb distance. It's the one where here's what they're doing. They're doing whatever it is that is the active verb. Still building out the rest of the frame. And then looking sort of that close middle distance to get a stronger sense, a different kind of feel, and looking very close within the settings to look for things that are telling of the individuals and their values. And then another dynamic to think about, you can use the same distance throughout different settings to make an expression and say, essentially, here's what is the same and here is how each person is different in terms of how they store their tools in this case. But then in a sequence, these can be like a pause or a break or a totally different kind of expression. So distance is extremely powerful and important. You're essentially varying the distances to say different things, to make different expressions, qualities, ideas in this setting. Unless the point is to not vary distance because you have a thread that you're weaving through a variety of settings and you want people to understand what is unique to each setting. Here's a series of photographs that convey different qualities. And the primary variable is changing the distance. In this case, the goal was to show what a slog it was. And it's made with close to a 500 millimeter lens from several hundred yards away. In this little further distance, the point was to the connection between observers and the experience of writing is this quixotic kind of thing in cyclocross racing. And then this is sort of a challenge is to combine multiple distances in a single photograph, like the riders in the far left are very close to the camera. Then there's middle distance, there's further distance until way back to infinity. So it doesn't have to be a singular distance that you're engaging with. It's often more dynamic if it's multiples. And getting as close as possible without getting run over. I did get run over at that football game. This was just a couple of weeks ago. Hurt a bit. anyway, the power of this writer, was what I was trying to convey. So getting both close and lower, and he's also about 6 feet 6 inches tall. So that played to the advantage of those dynamics. And that tree behind has been there for probably 100 years. The stability that that offered also introduced a quality. Backlighting again, reading the light first, and then getting down and close and letting the background work as well as the foreground. Proximity is close proximity is what makes this feel stronger. And then the idea of breaking the frame as opposed to incorporating everything within the frame. That's one of the values of distance. It is true that your brain will tend to finish what it cannot see in photographs. So if you introduce these kinds of photographs in your making and then in your choosing and sequencing, you're giving multiple experiences to the viewer. The assumption Cartier-Bresson used to say that people experience photographs through their eye, their mind, and their heart. And that's how that dynamic plays out. I've asked this question in a lot of different settings, and people just tend to say that, well, it's where you put stuff in the frame. And that's sort of true, but I think of it more as a responsibility to be placing elements three-dimensionally within the setting. The tendency is to think about the primary element and let everything else fall into place. Whereas if you think of the whole frame, the whole setting, you won't have oval photographs. You won't have probably often have centered, and you'll think beyond the parallel. And this becomes super important in sequencing. The more dynamic you are in compositions, the more dynamic your sequences will be. Again, starting with the question, what are you trying to convey through composition? Because you can do lots of different things just by composing differently. The critical thing is, where do you want people to look first in the setting? You might think it's with the primary activity, and that's an automatic. That's not necessarily the case. In this photograph, for instance, my intention was to start you deep within the frame because the goal, the why, was to convey a feeling of how much of a slog it was to get up this hill. So by forcing people's eyes deep into this photograph, it conveys that feeling of, oh my God, that was a lot of work. And it's not the primary element. The guy in the foreground, you would think, would be where you would focus. And if the goal were show a guy climbing the hill, the verb, then that would have been the case. Here's the more typical. You start with the primary element. You know, the light is nice. It's an okay photograph. Nothing wrong with it. But if the goal were, this was at the end of the game and they had lost something like 55-6, and they were not happy about it. So bringing people into the setting as opposed to just having it come out of them, I think is a better expression. Sam Abel calls this build the frame from infinity forward. All that means is that you're responsible for not just the writers in the foreground, but the writer in the middle ground back there, and then the writers in the far back distance. Filling that part of the frame was actually the most important goal in making this photograph. Part of the notion here is that the camera can make the verb in a given setting, but only you can finish the rest of the frame by being mindful and watching the other elements fall into place. So I encourage you to, again, as things rise and hit a crescendo and fall, look around the primary element and make sure that those things are falling into place, and just keep pushing the shutter and it will capture the action aspect of the setting. Just try that for a while and see if it proves true. A lot of people say of dynamic photographs, wow, that's got a lot of layers. But I always say, like, you know what? Plywood has a lot of layers, but it's not very deep. So I express it through spatial geometry, so that different points within the frame connect with each other on different planes. And the more varied those planes are, the more dynamic the photographs will be. It's like leading lines are a simple, simplistic example of that, where it's just creating a line that goes into the photograph. The way to think about this is triangulating elements on different planes within the photograph. What that means is, like, Martin Lewis was a painter in the 1920s, teens, and he often did these black and white renderings that were just beautifully spatially. And he often did this 3 against 1 or multiples against another dynamic. Just beautiful paintings. And when I saw these, I was like, oh my God, my mind blew up in terms of rethinking how to compose. So here's a triangulation of a scene that isn't, oh my God, earth-shattering or anything, but just connecting with the tree in the foreground, the one on the left, and then the one on the right is triangulation. It's why this photograph feels spatially deep. And literally a plane gets created in your mind through those 3 elements. Angularity, in other words, not being parallel to what you're photographing and being at an angle, is generally more geometric. It doesn't mean you always have to be at an angle. Sometimes parallels is the right decision. So just being at an angle to this is in Saint-Mary-Glace in Normandy, and just being at an angle to this setting makes it feel much more geometric. Dynamics of the sign in the foreground connects with the sign in the background, which connects with the flag and the dog, and then 2 people connect spatially, and just being at an angle makes a big difference. Another way to think about composition is that you build a stage and then you wait for the actors to complete the setting. In other words, that idea of waiting for a given setting to come to fruition is what I'm talking about. So here, I saw this happening. I ran over and I built the frame, and they started to do stuff, and it was working and working. And then Molly, the writer in the background, came into the frame. I was like, oh my God, the gods are with us today, kind of dynamic or reaction. But having, that top right little piece of the frame and the little bottom left elements, all of that was very intentional to create a frame that continued outside of what you see, as opposed to building everything within the frame. And even down to the cones in the background, that specific placement and the signs to juxtapose against the writer's signs created spatial relationships. Here too, this took I had like maybe 5 seconds to make this photograph. And they weren't doing anything. And then the person on the right raised up, the guy looked down, and the guy in the background leaned over. Again, framing the wheel in the left, the handlebar in the bottom right, the building in the background, the trees just as they are in the background, all of that was intentional. None of these photographs we've seen so far have been cropped, for what that's worth. I generally don't believe in cropping except for like minor refinements. The ideal is to crop the photograph within the camera through your seeing and expression. Doesn't mean like world-shattering kinds of things have to happen. This is an okay photograph. It's a bit ovalish, but then the dog comes in, he looks up, his hair flies up. And for me, it's a more interesting photograph. and also speaks somewhat to the chaos of these races. Here's an idea that photographs don't necessarily have to be about the present tense. They can speak to the past of things and the possibility of something happening in the future. Here's a minor event. These kids just ran through this puddle. You can tell that through the splash. And that little boy on the left is thinking, should I do this? So this is past, present, and future in one photograph. And when you start playing with those dynamics and sequencing, it gets super rich. I'm not much for rules, but I do believe you have to understand them and know them and their value so that you can go beyond the simplistic aspects of what rules tend to be. And I'm talking about rules of thirds and leading lines. And in my book, there's a whole little section on all of the rules that exist. And the irony is that if you followed all of those rules, you could still make really boring photographs. So there must be something more than simply following the rules if you want. For instance, like one rule is you shouldn't have odd numbers of elements or things within a frame. And yet, like Martin Lewis, the 3 against 1 is a very dynamic expression. And I love making Where's Waldo kinds of compositions, or pictures within a picture is another way to say it. Settings like this, the intention was to convey the kind of oddity of horses passing through this setting. These were all hand-built bicycles, and they were on a long ride to test out the viability of their bicycles, and a winner would be announced. Same here, settings like this that convey a sense of the volume of people who showed up, but also look at the number of moments that come to fruition. And you can actually understand a lot through the photograph, through this composition. It's the opposite of a verb photograph, though. There's a notion of time that a whole section in the book that speaks to non-photographic aspects that you can use in the creation of images. And this one, for me, time is a big thing. As photographs age, they express time differently. It's like this wasn't that long ago, but already the cars feel a little old. And if you look closely at the bikes, they're not disc brake bikes. So there was a point at which all bikes became, in this level, disc brake bikes. So being sensitive to time and its settings is a big thing. Here's a notion too, that the smallest element in the photograph, I think, is essential, is the most important to place within a setting. So this photograph goes back to 1987 when I was in grad school at Columbia, Missouri. And for me, the little Cupid doll in the foreground is the most important thing. If it weren't in this photograph, it would fall apart. So being sensitive to those kinds of things in a given setting are really important. If you notice in a lot of the photographs I've shown you, there are tiny elements like that are significant within the frame. Here's an important thing. I know people who say that if your photographs aren't interesting, it's because what you're photographing isn't interesting. And that's really contrary to my thinking. It's not what you photograph, but why, and then how you photograph whatever is in front of you that makes images interesting and engaging. For example, like this, my son, this is, well, my son's almost 40 now, so you get a sense of how long ago this was. I mean, it's just, we were going out fishing. That's a guide. My dad was there, and I was trying to this guy was smoking the whole time we were out there, and just that early morning mood. It's not important, but it has a feeling that I hope goes beyond my personal one. Here's my wife doing yoga in our backyard in Syracuse with our dog. Not a huge thing, but there's a stopping of time and a sense of space and mood that comes from the photograph that makes you pause, maybe. This is my wife's family, a gathering after a wedding, and just stopping those little moments in life as they pass you by and building a more dynamic kind of feel. It's what makes things special. Sadly, two of the people in this photograph have since passed. So photographs have lives, and lives around them change. So it's important. I started photographing birds of all things, like a bird, like what the hell, a bird, during the pandemic, because I could go out and didn't have to worry about getting COVID. So in this case, I kept seeing these hummingbirds, and God, they're like dive bombers cutting through everything. So I was trying to convey that sense. And this is a screech owl, and I was like, God, they're virtually invisible. So choice of timing of light and focal length and every other dynamic of color, all five of those things came into the making just to convey that sense of invisibility. And there's like a contrary nature to this. This bird is like maybe 3 inches tall, and it had these wicked looking little talons. So the contrary nature of tiny bird, big in the frame, with these talons was just to convey that sense. And the yellow warblers are these magic warblers in general, are just these incredible insect hunters. So the incredibleness is what I was trying to convey. This is, I think, the only photograph that is cropped slightly in this set. And then these trumpeter swans, that this was in March, and they have this beautiful poetry about the way they go about, and they're mated for life. So just trying to convey that sense. So the compositional approach, everything is built around trying to convey. And it was only for like a split second where this came to fruition. Here's a challenge for all of you. Just I've offered this challenge to a bunch of photographers over the years, and it is stay out of the middle. Don't put the important thing or anything at all in the middle of the frame, just to see if you can do it. Some examples, like in cyclocross, it's a very dynamic setting, so maybe it's easier in some ways. And yet, by nature, you would put sports toward the middle of the frame, the activity. In this case, that's the guy in the top left that I think completes the frame. The three in the foreground are fine, but without that guy, the frame falls apart. So again, you built the stage, and then you wait for the actors to complete the setting. As long as you have a clear intention of what you're trying to convey from the scene. This was a really dicey spot, so that two people are falling and the other is like, I made it, was the whole point. Sports action too, rule is you put the action leading into the frame. Like, I think there's tension if you have them coming out of the frame, and tension was the point. So framing with the little pylons and the crosses on the actually space between the two jump over points. Everything about this frame was built intentionally and then just waited for the right coming together. And I'll be darned if two writers didn't have exactly the same pose. Just magic happens once you anticipate it happening. Anticipation is another aspect of another chapter in the book. Not putting it in the middle, letting tension of placement add to the energy of the setting. Here's an idea too, that if the goal is to strive to make photographs that you can't always see when you're making them, so you set the wheels in motion and then you just hope everything comes to fruition, but you don't know for certain. If you know you're going to make a given photograph, it's probably pretty predictable. Back to birds. This is a yellow rumped warbler, and on this little pond near where I live. And I had no idea that's what happened when you sort of panned with a bird to water. It was fairly calm water too. So it's just, oh, what a present. Thank you. Again, moment value is all of the things that I've talked about coming to fruition in the frame. So for me to be able to say that's a yellow-rumped warbler, to know that spot, to know exactly when they were passing through, and then having the right lens, the right gear, the right aperture, the right reading of the light, the right seeing of the color, all of that stuff is what gives that photograph a sense of moment value. I was talking to a group recently and they're like, oh my God, there's no way I can do all of that stuff. So I suggested that instead of thinking of all of these at once, start with light and just train your eye to see light in settings and make light the starting point. Don't worry about all the others. Then once you feel a few days, a few settings, oh, okay, now I'm seeing things in a way I didn't before. Then move on to color and focus on that. Bring together the seeing, bring forward the seeing of light, and then add color. In other words, just build on all of these dynamics. And you'll find that over time, not that much time, suddenly you're seeing the world in a whole different way, at least in my experience. So that's the end of the first part, and I'll be darned, it's right at an hour. This is the front cover of my book. There's my email and my website.
Thank you, Mike.
We can pause for questions here.
Great, thank you for this first part. Just to inform alumni, there will be part 2, where Mike will present more his approach to selecting and sequencing. But now, yeah, let's first head to some questions. I would start with Joya Kus. She is asking, I have never heard of not using odd numbers of things in an image. Perhaps I learn more Eastern, not that I am. Who says that? I would love to hear Mike speak to this more, as I think twos even can be more static unless going for oppositional.
Yeah, maybe I didn't say that clearly enough. The general thought is that even numbers are less dynamic because it's a static number. It's this and that, whether it's 2 or 4 or 6, and the tendency if it's 3 or 5 or 7 or 9, there's more dynamic, spatial dynamic between the elements. So if there are even numbers, you can build it so it's 3 against 1. 2 against 2 is less dynamic, but 3 to 1 or 5 to 7.
All right, thank you. The next question is from Jimena Horta. She's asking, my work is very much the opposite of what you just taught us. A lot of centered photos, a lot of zenithal angle, very plain, I would say. In which ways do you think breaking the rules can work? My work tends to be more abstract, symbolic, and emotional.
You know, Paolo Pellegrini's photographs, he tends to put the primary element in the very middle of the frame, and yet his photographs are really dynamic because he sees the whole setting and he builds dynamics in the edges of the frame, unless the point is to isolate the singular thing. So it's not necessarily the case that if you build the photographs that you described, that's wrong. The point, I guess, is that if you do that unintentionally and just by default or automatically without fully thinking about it or without intention, then that's when you should rethink and is there a better way? If your starting point is a clear expression, a clear idea, concept, then chances are your approach to making them is the appropriate one. It's when we don't have a clear idea of what we're trying to say, and it's a pure rote response to a setting that uses those defaults, those defaults become a problem.
Thank
I
you,
hope that helps.
So this, because I think Jimenez's question also connects to one of the questions that follow, and it's a question on how our alumni can find their style in photography. I do think this goes beyond this lecture, but if you would give advice, would be great.
Sure. I think a misperception is that style is something that is external from yourself. It's something that you apply to your photographs. And poof, there's my style. It's actually the opposite. You are your photographs. So the more you strive to say, the more dynamic you make yourself, the more you learn about the world, the more you understand about what you're photographing, the more intentional and dynamic you are in what you are saying about what you photograph, the more unique will be your style. Style is just your approach to making photographs. If you find that you don't think there is style in your photographs, then you probably aren't trying to say enough, and you might just be showing what is happening in front of you. So the second you elevate what you're trying to say about what you're photographing, the more dynamic and precise your style will become.
So we have still a few of the questions. So if you don't mind, we would proceed, and then I do hope that for the second part, let's say 30 minutes would be enough, or yeah, all right. So let's continue with the questions. So Anastasia is asking, what is your opinion about having black and white and colorful images in one sequence? When can we justify it?
I think it can be extremely powerful to combine the two. That'll become a little more clear as I talk about the dynamics of sequencing. It's hard to explain in the abstract. It either works or it doesn't, kind of thing. But if what you're trying to convey is qualities, and the qualities that render better in color, and then you move to a black and white rendering, and that plays well against the previous image, it's the perfect decision.
Yeah, but we can tackle this question maybe after the second part. Then Karma is asking this: placing the subject in the center can isolate it from distracting elements. How can I do this while not placing my subject in the center?
Again, it's not necessarily a negative thing to put the primary subject in the middle. That photograph of the football player in the middle of the frame was a fine photograph, and maybe it was the right decision in that setting, whereas the guy holding the mushroom was not in the center. It really is a matter of what you're trying to convey. I think by not putting the guy with the mushroom in the middle gave a sense of discordance, or like, what's going on here? Whereas centeredness tends to be more straightforward or singular. Like a good example, actually. The director Wes Anderson. He puts the primary subject in the middle of the frame and splits the frame almost every setting, every frame in his films. And yet they're incredibly dynamic because his expression of light and color and just makes this really rich thing, as opposed to the director of that newer Mad Max movie with Charlize Theron. That director said, I put the action in the dead center every time so that people don't have to work. They always know where it's going to be. And if you watch that movie, it's an oval movie. The further you get from the middle, the less complete the frame. I fell asleep during that movie, and even though it's incredibly active, because it was a simplistic compositionally, I thought. And yet I can't stop looking at Wes Anderson. I could watch Wes Anderson without the sound, you know. So centeredness is not inherently negative. It is one dimensionality and lack of intention, dynamic intention, that is the negative.
Thank you. Then we had to the question of Mumin, is the following. To get more dynamic pictures, sometimes you don't get the picture. How would you deal with the anxiety of missing the picture?
Isn't that the like 80% of photography is the challenge of getting it? Because or 97%, because maybe 3% of the time we get it, if you're lucky. I mean, yeah, anxiety is frustrating, but it's the other side of the coin.
Yeah, exactly. Now we head to the question of Mohammed, and then after this one, I would have one more, and then we would head to the second part, because I do feel the other questions are connected more to your second part, and we will ask them after. So Mohammed is asking when the colors can be part of the narrative and say or define statement. So say define statement or be part of the narrative.
I guess it depends. It's a challenging question to answer. It's a good one. I think if you are clear in what you are trying to convey in settings, and then you read the color in those settings to convey those qualities, then obviously color is going to be a super important, and I often get, like, especially from photojournalists, is like, I can't control any of that stuff. And yeah, you saw from that football photograph of the coach and from the game, the chaos of the color versus the solemnity. And you can see parts of scenes and stand at an angle where things work and exclude some things and include others. So color becomes a critical dynamic of your storytelling in the same way that it does for Wes Anderson. He has more control, but he has the burden of creating it. You don't.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I saw there's also a question from Shamal, how to find strength of our photos. And I think it's good to talk about that also in the context of selecting, sequencing. So I would, now ask you to head to the second part of your presentation where you will talk about that. And for the alumni, you can still post questions. We will answer them at the end of the second part.
Okay, here goes. So if the first part was about creating the images that become the narrative, and the more dynamic you are in the creation of those images, then the more dynamic you can be in the realization of the narrative through selection and sequencing. Again, this is the fourth section of the book. My book speaks to this to a greater depth. The way I think of it is selecting and sequencing. It just essentially realizes the voice of a set of photographs. So the more dynamic your voice in creating, the more dynamic the voice will come from the selection and sequencing. It's also a continuation of the creative process. Often people think of editing and sequencing as independent of the creation of the work. And I think in the same way that once you have created a sequence, then where it lives is a continuation of the creative process, whether it's a book or a website or a museum exhibition or a gallery show, whatever. It is a continuous process that isn't, none is independent of the other. As you're editing your own work or someone else's work, I encourage you to think of it in two different ways, in two different tiers of process. One is every frame you make, you should create a hierarchy within that. What I mean by a hierarchy is here's the best, second best, third best, fourth best, fifth best, sixth, seventh. That becomes incredibly important for many reasons that I'll get into a little more. And then the second tier is choosing for specific uses from that hierarchy you've created. If you try to just jump into a set of pictures and pick photos for a specific use, you might miss things, you might not make the best choices. I realize that sometimes you don't have a choice. You have a very tight deadline. They want this in 10 minutes. I made 300 pictures. I'm just going to go until I find 3 that work and I'm going to get them out. But oftentimes we do have more time to get to know the photographs and create this hierarchy. So it's really important that you do them separately. This is something I've been doing for quite a few years. I realized how important it was when I was working at the White House, because we would get requests for like a photograph of the president doing X or Y. And to find that photograph, I'd have to look through virtually every photograph. So I started looking at every frame and then rating them A, B, C. So if I, for a given request, all I had to do was tap into the A level of those photographs. And instead of several hours, it took several minutes. So this is important, not just for a specific use, for the life of your archive. It becomes a critical component. Before we get into the selecting and sequencing, I want to talk about how to look at photographs, which may start to answer the question, was it Mohammed asked? The first thing is it's a lot like opening a bottle of wine. You know, you read the label and then you remove the cork and slowly get into, finally, then you drink a glass. So the first step is always, what do you feel from a given photograph? Do you, more than just understanding what is pictured, is there any other dynamic? And oftentimes, if you don't get anything, you just move on right away. Then be sensitive to how your eye travels through the photograph. If it starts in the middle and then doesn't go anywhere else, unless that middle is super powerful, chances are it's not much of a photograph. If, on the other hand, you've been given a tour through the photograph where you start here and then go there and there and there and there and there and there, and the more there is, maybe the better that is. So just being sensitive to that dynamic. And then ask yourself if there are fatal flaws. So obviously technical things can be a fatal flaw, like the exposure is bad, the shutter speed was too slow and everything's blurry, stuff like that. But in terms like if the quality of light just doesn't match what I think the setting was about, then that's a fatal flaw. If your eye starts in this red blob in the top right corner and the most important thing is over here on the left side, then that's a fatal flaw. There can be tons of fatal flaws. Basically, traveling through the photograph and you're like, nah, something's wrong here. It just doesn't work. Then you ask yourself if it is successful, and you define what success is for your given images and given reason for them existing. then moving beyond how you look at photographs, then it becomes easier for selecting. Going back to that, creating the hierarchy first, it becomes really important to separate the idea from that images exist for a specific purpose. I'm making this book, or I was assigned to photograph this person, this activity, this setting is the purpose. Whereas assess the images purely as images. Are they successful at that level? Again, does the photo convey a quality or an idea, or is it simply an informational thing? That'll determine how high it rises in your hierarchy, probably. Then assess all of those 5 things: the light, the color, the distance, composition, and moment value in a given photograph. If 4 of the 5 are not hitting at a pretty high level, chances are it's not a successful photograph. If the light is just phenomenal, but the composition isn't as strong, it might still work. If there isn't really a moment value, it probably isn't going to be that successful of an image. If the color fails, all of that dynamic. The critical thing is to not overthink. You can sit and just spend seconds, minutes, whatever on a single photograph, but it's really it's like it either works or not, and you can determine that in a matter of seconds, really, I think. Another thing you can ask is, do you ever want to see this photo again? Does it have value beyond today? And if not, then you don't move it forward in the hierarchy. So here's my process for creating a hierarchy within a given take or a set of photographs. First, it's done through multiple passes. The goal of this is to get over the experience of having made the photographs. You know, you've had the smells, you had the sight, the conversations, the interactions, everything about the making of a photograph is lingering with you and can easily weigh into your decision of the photograph's value as independent of whether the photograph actually works or not. Like the old, I walked 3 miles to get that photograph. It's a good photograph kind of thinking. So I found that by looking at photograph multiple times, you tend to wear off that making pictures dynamic. So in the first pass, first time you look at photographs, I suggest looking at them at a contact sheet view, another grid, and just scroll slowly through every photograph you've made. And you're like, oh, did that one work? Did that one work? And you might pull that frame up and, oh man, I just nailed it. It worked. Oh, I'm so happy. Or like, oh, geez, that one just is an absolute failure. In other words, you're letting yourself get through that process of having made them. The second one, make the image large on your screen and just scroll through them. You've opened you've removed the cork, and now you're like just letting yourself, what's the nose coming from the bottle? Was the cork corked? Those kinds of dynamics. In a third pass, you're actually finally now deciding, do I ever want to see this photograph again? And if the answer is, yeah, it has some value, the light at least minimally works, the other 4 dynamics are minimally successful, I get something from this photograph beyond what it shows. So I use Lightroom. So in that case, 1 star moves it up in the hierarchy. Then you go back and you select just the 1 stars and you go through them. And ideally, you've let a little bit of time pass. So you're kind of coming to the 1 stars newly, a fresh perspective on those. And you go through each one and you say, you've raised the bar. And it's like, okay, well, this one seems to be better. This one, not so much. This one, and in other words, you're given ones that you deem to be a little more successful. Again, not a huge burden. You're not trying to go from a piece of lumber to a house built in one step. You're building this set very slowly. So then you have a set of 2 stars that you bring up in front of you, and then you go back through them and you go to 3 stars. And depending on how large the set of photographs, you might have to go up to 5 stars in Lightroom or Photo Mechanic or whatever you use, until you create, okay, here's the absolute best, the cream of what I have photographed. And then you go back through those that you didn't select just to make sure you didn't leave anything behind that is worth considering. Inevitably, I've found almost always that there were photographs that are worth considering. An important thing, inevitably, there are going to be photographs that are very similar, and make the judgment, okay, these are very similar, but they're both moderately successful, so I'm going to move them forward. At some point, though, you're going to have to decide between 2 images. And the way that I do it is look at same things within each photograph and decide, okay, in this one, this is better. In this one, that is better. Inevitably, there might be one single thing about one of the photographs that elevates it, and then everything else around it is also somewhat stronger. So like in this photograph, the woman in the bottom right is stronger in that photograph on the left than it is on the right. Pretty much everybody else is about the same, except for the woman in all black with the arm warmers. And that was what made me choose that one over the one on the left. It's very easy in this kind of setting to just, oh my God, I could agonize over this for minutes and hours. But really, if you just break it down to the components and decide, okay, of all the components, this one weighs more favorably. So this is a small set of photographs on one of the bike builders, what the hierarchy looks like in Lightroom. This, I just went up to 3 stars, 2 stars, 1 stars. And this is what it looks like. We'll see these photographs some more in a few minutes. They're Lottie Headley photographs from New Zealand. So I use color selections in Photo Mechanic when creating a hierarchy within that. There's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 layers of hierarchy in this set of photographs. In Photo Mechanic, you can tag the images as one step, then start using no color. Then, in this case, I think it's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 colors. Part of the reason to do this is so that you're not diving back into the entire take and rethinking. And I've often heard photographers say, what about that photograph? You know, it was like 3 layers back and it did this and that. And it's like, yeah, but you know, we decided this other one was stronger than that one. Also, if you have a given request from someone, say a publication calls you, hey, I'm looking for a photograph of X, Y, or Z, and you go into your archive and you look at just the top tier, you can say, okay, I've got it and it's strong. If it's not there, you can go down 1 layer or 2 or whatever. So it just builds efficiency into your entire archive and your workflow. The critical thing, it's easy to make judgments about something you've just photographed, or looking at someone's photographs, decide, oh, these are terrible. Oh my God, I can't believe this kind of thinking, because there are so many bad ones. When I was at National Geographic, I kept track of what percentage of photographs I pulled. This was with slides. And those that I left behind, and it was 8% were minimally successful. With digital, it's probably an even lower percentage these days. And you would not judge the strength of that take based on 100% of the photographs, but only on the 8% or the top tier, actually. So give yourself a break and create the hierarchy and then assess your work from the hierarchy, from the top of the hierarchy, not the whole take. Once you've got that hierarchy in place, it's a good thing to ask yourself, okay, what did I do? Why are these photographs that are on the top there? And what kept those that are lower from being more successful? In other words, okay, if I go into a similar setting or when I go out next, what can I do to increase the likelihood that more will have the top rating? In other words, the value of creating the hierarchy beyond those I've spoken to is that it's a self-educating process. You get better at editing your own work and you get better at making photographs once you go back out into the field. And that's probably the most important thing about being a photographer, that you continue to grow and not rely on others to make you grow, but to figure out ways to teach yourself to make better photographs. Once you have the hierarchy, then you choose for specific uses, whether it's from an assignment, a book, a project, or whatever. It's critical that you understand fully the dynamics of that usage. Like if it is a publication and you've never worked for them, you better understand how they're going to use the photographs, how many they might want. Are they prone to favor this kind of image over that kind of image? In other words, learn everything you can to increase the likelihood that you're going to send them the right set of photographs, or the set of photographs that they'll respond to more favorably. The value of the hierarchy is that then for a given usage, if you can stick with just the top tier of the images, you'll be sending the strongest work. If you realize they've asked for a specific thing, or you need to address a specific aspect of what was photographed, you may have to go into the next layer below it or the next one below that. And that's fine for a given usage, but you do so knowingly. You're not just filling their grocery list. Ideally, you submit your whatever work in whatever setting in a sequence. There is power in sequencing, and if you sequence well, it represents your work better than if you just sent them by creation time or something of the sort. And just for the record, always send photographs with captions and full metadata. Never release photographs from your hands that don't have those things. And obviously a delivery memo or something that explains what you're sending, and anything else relevant that would help them understand what they're going to be receiving and their responsibilities with those photographs. Okay, now we get into the fun stuff, the actual sequencing. It's very different. It does vary by usage, like how National Geographic sequences is going to be different from the Atlantic, probably, or Aperture's sequencing and structure is going to be different from Magnum's. Generally, though, the ends of the spectrum are purely informational sequencing, or representing a process that had a beginning, middle, end, versus a more lyrical, mood-driven or quality-driven sequence. Inevitably, the informational approach just has a beginning, middle, end. It's a process that started here and ended there. It's funny, on an informational sequence, you can probably sort by creation time, and voila, you're done. It's all ready to go. Maybe you move one or two photographs here and there. So sequencing for publications or settings that are purely informational is It's a no-brainer and generally not terribly interesting. A lot of newspapers do this. Like, here's the beginning of the game, the middle of the game, the end of the game. Here's the parade and the beginning, the middle, of the end. It's why a lot of newspaper photography is boring as hell. Lyrical, to say a little more, it's basically a non-linear narrative, and I think of it as visual music. Literally can hear the music in photographs. It's the difference between like single notes and chords. Photographs that have lots of dynamic and expression and things that they're conveying are like chords of music. So if you're sequencing chords and thinking of it in those terms, then it's a lot different process than if just purely note by note by note. Another way generally to think of sequencing is if you're creating a roller coaster and you're making people go up and patient, and then crash down and make a hard left and hard right. Lyrical sequencing is what I'm mostly going to talk about. And you can do that digitally on screen or physically. In the lyrical sequencing digitally, what process I use is if I know that this book is going to probably be about 60 photographs, I'll start with at least 120 to build the sequence from. So it's going to be the strongest 120 photographs. Again, the hierarchy coming in. I've just found this over the years. If it's a newspaper article or a magazine piece where they're running 10 to 20, start with 20 to 40, so on. So what I do is I choose what I think is the best first image. And the best first image, W.M. Hahn, I was at a presentation he gave once, and he said, somebody asked him, how do you decide which first image? And he said, well, don't be a jerk and make me just like look at the photograph and have no idea what this is about. At the same time, don't pick the photograph that gives away everything and is purely informational. So you have to have some level of, okay, I get what this is about and I'm intrigued. I just got to go forward from this photograph. So then the process in Photomechanic or Lightroom, you do a split screen view, put that first image on the left side of the screen, and then literally scroll through every other image on the right side. And what you're doing is looking for relationships between the photographs. And I'll talk about what kinds of dynamics those relationships can be. Basically, what Wilson Hicks called the third effect in his 1952 book about picture editing. It's probably the best book ever written on the topic, even though he was talking about words and pictures on a page. It does translate well into our world. So dynamics. The first one is like how your eye travels between images. If your eye starts here in the top left in one photograph and you leave the photograph at that same point, chances are you're going to start looking at the next photograph in that same spot in that millisecond when you land on the image. So if you keep it the same, and that's what's most important about the second photograph, that's a consistency and it can work to your benefit. If you're trying to create a more of a sense of discord, you can say, okay, I want you to leave this photograph here and start this one down in the bottom right. Then that has a dynamic. You're making people work a little bit. The mood that comes from the color or light and or the activity or whatever is happening in the photograph is one of the more powerful dynamics. It can be somber to somber. It can be energetic to very quiet. It can be playing on, essentially, if you think of the adjectives that might represent the photographs, then how are you playing adjectives against each other? Are you keeping them consistent or changing them? If something is really high energy, then you go to something very low energy. That's a powerful dynamic that you're playing with. That photograph of the guy with the sweaty face, that's a photograph that pops out from the frame. And the photograph of the bicycle riders with the guy riding up or walking up the hill, that's a photograph that pulls you into it. So that's one of the most powerful dynamics that you can play with in sequence. If one photograph comes out at you and the next one pulls you into it, that's a very active experience in sequencing. Or you can keep them same for a few frames and then break that. That's where the rhythm or the music comes in. Same for where your eye travels, keeping it the same or not. That's an example of musicality or roller coaster dynamic. You can also, that photograph that represent the past, present, and future, you can play with that. You can speak to, in one photograph, something that has happened, and then in the next one, maybe something that grew out of that having happened. So you don't, and not everything is in the present tense in terms of sequencing. The critical thing, though, you can get so esoteric in this kind of sequencing that you just can't bridge informationally or experientially from one photograph to the next. So you do have to be mindful of that. It's a hard thing to try to explain, but maybe we can do a little exercise that touches on that. So light itself, the qualities that you can play with in sequencing are the quality of the light, the warmth, the cool, and the directionality, the angularity of the light. Your brain reads where light is coming from. So if in one it's coming from the upper left, and the other next photograph it's coming from behind what is photographed, and then the next one it's coming from behind the photographer and landing flatly. That's a very active experience for the mind as it looks at that sequence. Or if you keep it same, change. Or if you're different every time, that creates a sense of chaos or intensity. So just be mindful of the directionality and the quality and temperature of the light. Same for color. If the mood that the color conveys is, keep it consistent or change it. If the color has you start in the top left in one photograph, and the color in the next photograph makes you start in the bottom right, that's very different dynamic to play with. Also, if separation, like if that Grand Canyon photograph is very separate, and then the next photograph you came to one where the color is very one-dimensional, that's a powerful sequencing potential. Distance is logically very powerful. If one photograph you're looking way back and the next you're very close to it, that's a huge experiential aspect of photographs. Or if you keep them very consistent, then what becomes a part of it is you're more understanding what is different about each setting and not so worried about saying different things through distance. Compositionally, you can go from very simple compositions to very complex. You can simple, complex, simple, medium, complex. It's a rhythm that you can play with, basically. All of these things are just like it's like being a chemist, and you're pulling things off of the shelf and making, oh my God, this is a thing that's never been created before. That notion of where you land in a photograph is a compositional function as well. And then where you leave in a photograph is also, you don't necessarily leave where you started. So that idea of being a tour guide through the frame, chances are you can tell people where to depart a photograph. A physical lyrical sequence just starts by making prints. And then my suggestion, instead of just spreading them all out in front of you, is to group them in rows that share a theme, a topic, an idea, a person, whatever threads there are within the set of photographs that are similar. And inevitably, if you create a certain number of rows, you might realize, whoa, wait a minute, this one actually splits into two. And it's useful not just for sequencing, but it also tells you the range of photographs that you made, the range of what you dealt with. Then the next step is to move the strongest photographs forward in each of those rows, which is another learning experience. It's like, okay, God, I spent so much time in this one area, but there are only 4 photographs. What happened? And none of them is really that great. It's a good thing to do as you're working on a project too, just because you can assess the strength of what you've done so far and realize, I got 30 photographs here that are working pretty good. I'm going to stop photographing that. And I've got none over here or 2, and I need to work harder on that. So once you have that kind of established and you've gotten very familiar with it, you start to pull pairings like, whoa, this one and that one from the 3 rows over. Look at the magic. And then you set them down in front of those, leave space to create the sequence in front of you. And then inevitably, you might find out, when this one ties to that. And okay, there's 3, I'm going to put those there. And then you find these 4, 5, 6 work together. They don't connect to that one yet, but it's like building a puzzle in an organized way, and it's great fun. So once you've got the small sets in front of you, you can move those around and more completely realize it. And then you just keep building those until you either run out of photographs or you're starting to repeat the ideas that you've created. So here's what this looks like, literally. These were graduate students and undergrad students at Syracuse University when I taught there, building out a book sequence. It's a great thing to do with someone else because the conversation and interactivity elevates the experience. And then here's, this is Erin Elkheim and I worked on this sequence at our home, and it's my wife again responding to it. My wife's a designer. She's designed bunches of photo books and is now a UX designer. So her opinion was really valuable and helpful. So we started with something like 264 of those prints and then built these sequences that you see down below. It's important, whether it's digital or physical, to review it as you go. In digital, it's easy. You get 5, 10 photos in a sequence, then run them as a slideshow and just let yourself soak it up. And inevitably, you'll be like, whoa, that one doesn't quite work there, but it might. It's helpful to show the sequence to others once you've built it and just have them respond with no direction or anything. I just want to see what you think. And watch them, watch how their eyes travel through the sequence and their expressions, and you'll learn a lot. That human dynamic in this interactivity is really important. And then also let it set for as long as you have, a day, a week, whatever, and then come back to it. And you'll probably change a few things. Back to that idea in sequencing, can you bridge from one photo to the next purely experientially and informationally? Why, the why and the purpose of the photographs will determine whether a digital versus a print physical is a better approach for you, or purely informational, where it's just process driven. Any one of them can be the right choice depending on you and why the photographs exist. So that's that. I can show you, let's see, just really quickly, an example of what I meant by the scrolling, the first step, scrolling through a set of photographs at a contact sheet view. This is 3,210 photographs I made a couple weeks ago. Went back to my hometown in Nebraska to do a project. So it's really, I'm like, oh my God, did that one work? Oh, sort of, yeah. This was so much fun. Did it play out with the kids leaving? And no, not that one, but maybe another one. Then starting the rating. So of the 3,210, I gave 480 1 star. So that's again that basic. There's some merit to the photograph. Then from that, it went to 223 with 2 stars, 130 with 3, 86 with 4, and 64 with 5, which is about right for that volume of photographs. And then any specific use, I would go to the color. I think I did a smaller set to send someone for their impressions. Just a quick exercise to show you the sequencing. In this case, this was a day-long series of horse races near Auckland, I believe, New Zealand. And so you could just sort by capture time and say, okay, there's the sequence, and just pick the strongest ones. Or because it was all day and it was race started, another one was starting to form, my preference would be to choose a single image, move it to the first spot, go to the split view. And in this case, this was one photograph I did crop slightly. In this case, let's see, I can't see that. I can't do it in split view. Just to make an example of, see how the girl is almost dead center. To me, this is an example of putting her in the dead center really flattens the picture. So just by doing, and makes the background less dynamic. So just by slightly moving her off center and then correcting the horizon creates much more of a spatial relationship in the photograph. Now the dad looking at her and the cliffs in the background become more pulled back and there's much clearer hierarchy. Anyway, so I've got these sorted by the hierarchy. So we're looking at the strongest first. And it's literally just going through, seeing if there is that third effect or dynamic. First one kind of asks the question of, okay, father, son, daughter riding horses on the coast. Why? I'm in, but tell me more. Or you can continue. That doesn't quite make sense. That's totally different. This is an example of you can't get from left to right informationally. You don't quite yet understand enough about the setting. Same here. Why? What? They're just riding horses. Now I'm looking at jockeys. What? Maybe that because the setting stays similar. You can transition between the two. Now that's because there's Spatially, you've got the nice dynamics of 3. You've got clearly something that is cared about. So that one might actually work as a second one. It starts to move into the other setting. It's a nice change from a medium distance to a tighter one. The color dynamic works together. The quality of light changes. It's going from the left on the first photo to be on the right with a strong fill. So let's just, for expedience sake, just move it to there. Then you would do the same thing and keep going. That sort of works. You've got a trailer and a trailer, activity, activity. But then this one spatially works a little more. You've got somebody dealing with a couple horses, now backing off into a different kind of setting. So there's, for expedience, do that. Now, oh, wait, clearly this is a horse race, and you've gone from the middle of the frame and that one on the left in the middle foreground to top left in the next one, color dynamic, repetition of shapes, everything works. So you could then move to that and start to suggest something more. So you get the idea. I don't want to, we could spend an hour just doing this, but I think that gives you enough sense of non-linear and yet connected. Basically, this type of sequencing, what it does is create a series of chain links. Each photo is linked to the next. It becomes difficult to pull them out. And yet, oftentimes, if you had to go from, say, 20 photos down to 12, you could selectively pull specific images and they would still hold together as a sequence. So I'm almost, that's like 55 minutes. I better stop.
Thank you so much, Mike. It was really great seeing into your process and hearing about the process. Our alumni obviously have a lot of questions. So since we don't have much time left in this session today on editing, I would head to the question of Roba Viheba. The question is, in sequencing, what's your take on using transitional shots that are not necessarily considered the most powerful shots on their own, but they somehow help establish a rhythm and bring out the strength in other shots?
That's a good question. The way to think of it, I think, is more like a film. It's almost how movies are sequenced. And sometimes you need this photo to get to that photo. And maybe you dip slightly, like even in that sequence, the second photo is a number 2 rated image. So it wasn't a top tier photo, but it worked strongly in that sequence. What happens, though, is that you sometimes end up the opposite, where some of the strongest photographs don't work in the sequence. So you have to give both ways, because sequencing, again, as the musical reference, you can stick photos in there that are like a doesn't work, even though they're powerful as independent images.
Yeah, and then to connect to this sequencing, Joseph had also a question on when working on a long-term project, can sticking to a chronological order be more of a problem with the sequence, or can it help?
Well, everything starts with the why. I mean, what are you trying to convey? Say, why does the project exist? What's its message? And then what is the best approach? In the same way that rules are not very helpful, saying, it is or isn't right to do sequence or like capture time sequencing. Sometimes it absolutely is. So if that's what best fuels what you're trying to accomplish, convey, then absolutely use it. And honestly, it's often a hybrid, as I said, between the two.
And then to go back to the question of Anastasia with black and white photography and colorful images in one sequence, and when can we justify it, if we can return to that?
So even in that set of photographs that I made a couple of weeks ago, some of those photographs I think are much stronger. Like those two football players type photos work better in black and white than color. So I would actually consider seeing if there were enough. I think if like one photograph or two in a group of 20 or 30 or 40, that probably doesn't make sense unless there's a historical reference to a black and white image or reason, very specific reason for single or double black and white photos. It plays into the rhythm nature of photographs. And if black and white introduction adds to the rhythm and they're enough to sustain that rhythm, then absolutely.
Thank you. And then I would conclude, I know we still have quite a few questions, but since it's already the time for us to finish the session, I would ask you also a question from David Diaz Arcos. And it's, do you think that media photography editors look for images that have their own style, a unique author's look, or are they only interested in a descriptive photo that tells a story?
Well, picture editors, visual media editors, like everything else, are on a spectrum. And certainly some of them do that. They choose you as a photographer for the way that you make photographs, and they want the type of photographs that you make applied to what they need photographed. There are others in the middle spectrum who choose you for how you make photographs, but then they want you to make their photographs. And then there are others who don't even care. Just you happen to be close to what I need photographed, so give me what I need. I wish it were. The critical thing is, I think, for you to learn enough about the editors to be able to work with those that not exactly share your approach, but that can help you realize your approach or are going to respond to your work as it is. Give it voice.
So yeah, I think you will work on this as well with our alumni in 2 weeks. As we said, there will be a second session with Mike coming up on the 25th of October. We agreed with Mike that the maximum of 6 alumni will be selected for the workshop. And you do need to go through the application procedure, which is described on our website. But then, Mike, would you have any advice or notes on that, like on the workshop? How can alumni prepare? Anything?
Well, my assumption is that it's a project-based review, not like a portfolio with a range of topics. So it's almost as if you were applying for a grant or a competition, thinking of it in those terms. So selection and sequencing, and then writing the summary in a way that makes it clear what you're trying to accomplish, why you're doing it, and what it speaks to. The biggest error I've seen in photographers sequencing their work, submitting for grants, is that they tend to sequence based on the information that the photographs represent. And it works for the information, but you're looking at the photograph going, okay, I get this one, but I can't get from this one to that one until I read the caption. And I think in the grant environment, having watched judges respond to entries at the Alexia for 8 years, if they don't make sense visually, they probably won't move forward. And oftentimes at the Alexia, they would never even ask for captions. So they have to convey things, qualities by themselves as images. So that's why I suggested you always start your hierarchy from addressing them as images, not what they represent or information.
All right. Yeah, thank you for this insight. It's a good connection. You're mentioning now Alexia Grant because next week we will head to Sarajevo, where Bruce Strong, that's now also like chair of Alexia Grant, I think, will talk about the grant. So it's good to have you here as well. You've been chair in the past and you have a lot of experience, so it's a good connection to that. And I think alumni will learn a lot from this experience also with you for potential application to grants in the future on how to really prepare a good sequence, a good edit of their work, and that can help them in further process of how they apply, not only to grants, but yeah, to other opportunities.
Excellent.
All right.
And did everybody notice that the light changed? It's now hitting my desk and there's a piece of white paper. So it's filling.
Here as well. Here it's very dark already. So yeah. Okay, what we usually do with our alumni after the end of each session is we do a social mixer. So Mike, if you have the time to stay with us for 10 minutes discussion with our alumni, we would be very happy. So if you have to go to another lecture or session, you're free. But yeah, if you're willing to stay with us, that would be great. We have over 40 alumni still here. So what we always do is we promote them to speakers, so we can just talk to them. I will just, before we head to the social mixer, like to remind all alumni that our one-to-one mentorship open call is still open until this Sunday, so please apply. I saw that someone also asked in the Q&A, how do they apply? Head to the VII Community website, log in, and see under events the mentorship. If not, just send us an email to community@VII Academy and we will provide more information. But yeah, now to those that cannot talk, you don't have to join us, but to the ones that can join us, please do. But yeah, we'll be a bit slow in inviting people to panelists, but it should last a minute. Maybe in this time, Mike, you can tell us a bit about your book that you published, I think, in the beginning of this year, right, at Routledge?
Yeah, just in January. Well, the first section deals with the why, why we make, what can you actually, how to think beyond what you now are about why you're making photographs on the like grand sense and individually. And basically the book is a percolation of my experience in working with photographers and teaching as an editor, as a photographer, to try to, beginning to end, present a concept of how to increase the likelihood that you'll make successful photographs, build them into sequences, build them into a working environment where you can get better work, more work, and into the promotion. And the last chapter is making a living. So it's trying to apply not just principle, but actually hands-on. How do you take this and make a better livelihood? Actual title names sort of walk you through. It's why do we make pictures? Photography's means of expression. You make photographs engaging, which deals with the fact that you are your photographs and understanding the antecedents, the history of photography and comfort zones. The next section is selecting and sequencing. Then how do you create visual narratives? And then finally, how do you make a living doing this stuff?
Yeah, which is something that our alumni especially want to know, I would say, because there's the lack of assignments, let's say, for a few. They're always applying to grants. So yeah, there's opportunities, but not everyone gets them, right? So it's really a challenging field, but that's why we have this community, hopefully, to help in the process.
For what it's worth, the people I see struggling are mostly those who have tried to make a living as they always have. They've thought that things would stay the same and the same people would be hiring them. I think the first sentence in the paragraph is that, or in the book, is that there are more ways to make a living as a visual storyteller now than there ever have been. It's just that the traditional ones have shrunk, have diminished. So you have to look for new sources, new kinds of outlets, new approaches to creating work that can exist in a variety of settings, and being much more active in reaching out to people with ideas and making things happen yourself as opposed to waiting for the phone to ring.
Yeah, the landscape changed quite a lot, right? So I think we really need to be able to adapt and to explore, also to be curious and to not be limited to the old models. I think you even said that in one of your interviews, that we really need to shift a bit this perspective.
Well, it's interesting too, I mean, there are people who would contradict almost everything I said today in the profession. So an important thing to learn, and to the question about working with picture editors, is understanding where people are coming from. As I judge photography competitions, it's astounding to me often still that people see in very specific ways and they respond to very specific kinds of imagery and are blind to other kinds. So the quicker you understand that where you fit into the dynamic, the more productive you can be in connecting with potential clients who will pay you to produce that work. It's always like, I make shoes, but they're buying suits. Whereas you find people who buy shoes like you make, then you'll make shoes.
Great example. So I don't know if our alumni would turn on their microphones and cameras, those who can, or at least the microphones. Would be great to hear from you, just have a very quick discussion. We usually do community hangouts, which happen the first Wednesday of each month, where we have a bit more informal discussions, but after each session, we still like to hear from the alumni in the session. So how is everyone? Maybe Joya? Am I saying your name correctly? I apologize if I'm pronouncing it, but
you are saying it absolutely 100% correctly. It's amazing. Not many people can do it so flawlessly. So kudos. Thank you. And thank you for this, Mike. It's so nice to, I've never actually seen you in person, I don't believe. But I love your demeanor. I really love what you've shared with us today. It's been fantastic. I did have a question. Is this okay to have questions right now?
Mike, do you still have the time?
Sure.
So,
okay, I was just curious if you had an explanation for your color breakdown in the photomechanic way that you were looking at the photographs, because I use the colors in one way, but I'm always curious about other people's methods.
I guess they're different parts. One, you can set your own colors. So my colors are probably look different from what you use. It's basically one star is the best. It's the opposite of Lightroom is part of the challenge, just the way it works. So I start with the number 5 rating is the lowest, the base, and then move up. So that because the way that photomechanics sorts, it starts with 1 and moves down.
Thank you.
So maybe the others, yeah, if you have some comments, if you want to talk to Mike a bit more, or just, yeah, tell us what you're currently working on, or have some questions for the community in general, you're free to speak.
Hi, Mike. I had a question. So while sequencing, what if your pictures are very graphic and in your what if it's a off-beat kind of pictures? So how do you sequence them? How do you bring it to a very like a lyrical flow? How do you give it a lyrical flow to it?
By graphic, do you mean not people or?
I mean, what if the flow of the picture is very upbeat? So how do you balance it?
I don't know. I worked with a photographer who photographs in the Antarctic, and each photograph was very just graphic. It was beautiful, lyrical in its own way. So you just basically interpret what is the photograph convey, and then how do you experience it visually. So if one photograph is more somber and quiet, maybe you need another one that's slightly different next, and then you hit one that's very brash and loud. So if you think of photographs not so much as to what they show, but how do you feel when you look at them is another way of sequencing. And the less sort of human activity based they are, the more you can do that.
Thank you.
Anyone else with a question, additional question for Mike?
Hey, Mike, I'm from India. It was a fascinating journey to listening to you. Amazing. I would definitely like to purchase your book. I was looking through it today in Amazon. So I have a question. Did you mean to say that every day we should, for our project, we should actually come back and do some sort of filtration with the stars and all, and never look back again?
If you have like 7 tiers of hierarchy in what you're creating, you should probably never have to go into ones that got no rating. Yeah. But looking at those 7 tiers can be helpful and say like, whoa, why are all of these down here? If you photograph
I have one connecting question. So generally we retouch the images before we submit somewhere, right? So when we should add the metadata and when we should retouch, is it the last process, or is it even before adding the first star for each image?
the metadata, I mean like caption and basic information. Yeah, and I do that right after importing. I'll go through and apply a general caption to whatever applies to everything, and then get more and more specific with each set of pictures from given settings, and then start the rating. That's part of the process of getting more familiar with actual photographs as opposed to the experience of making them. Jaime, you asked about zoom lenses in the Q&A.
Shane, right?
I did. I heard some photographers berate the zoom lenses, and I found that, coming back from being a newspaper photographer for many years, that's your bread and butter for the most part. I want to hear what you have to say about that. That's important to me.
Sure. I mean, I used to think that too, and I would only use primes for a couple decades. But one, the quality of the lenses has improved, and two, I think it's how you use them. If you stand still and then you're just raking the lens in and out, then that's not the best use. the way that I suggest is you decide, okay, I need a 35 millimeter perspective, and you do that, and then you move to where that photograph needs to be made, or 50 or 200 or 500 or whatever. So I think the problem is when you think you can just change the focal length and that's the solution to getting a better photo. Sometimes, yeah, you can't move, you're on a line and you need to zoom in to get a tighter perspective, but generally just choosing a focal length, then making the picture.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I don't know if anyone else would like to either present themselves. I see some very familiar faces. We do have quite a few alumni who are with us in all of the sessions, so that's great to hear this see this continuity. Jimena, maybe hello to you.
Hi, Michael. It's been great. What a masterclass. Amazing information. So I come from the filmmaking school, and it was very familiar to listen to your advice. And I wonder, what do you have to say about, for example, using like photograms? You were talking about like having a hierarchy. In my case, I would do like a movie sometimes or a sequence, but with still photography. Do you think that can be something that can work? Do you have any thoughts about this? Thank you again.
Let's see. In terms of like creating photograms or any other specific medium, trying to create a hierarchy within those, what I've found is that the more clear you are in what you're trying to accomplish through a photograph, the more likely you are able to choose the photograph that does that. So like artists versus photojournalists, you know, your photojournalist like, I gotta get it. And then you figure out, oh, I guess this one worked. Whereas artists tend to be much more intentional in the creation of the image, so are more likely to be able to recognize those that are successful. So it's less critical in that environment to create that hierarchy. You probably need to do some other kind of, here's where I've achieved what I wanted to say, and here's where I haven't kind of thinking. Then in sequencing, for sure, in a film environment, different media, different realizations of the work, that's where it gets wonderfully magical. The critical thing, I think, there are as many ways to make successful photographs as there are people. So it took me forever to figure this out, because I always thought, you know, you absorb what you're supposed to do, and if you do that, then you're good. But then I realized, no, wait, because this person's photographs are very different from that person's, and they're both good. So what is it about each of them that makes their photographs successful? And that's essentially where this book came from, is trying to, okay, there are certain things that regardless of the kind of work that you produce, it encapsulates. So that, I mean, that's where I, you know, whether you're doing purely graphic and they're just beautiful lyrical, you know, like mood-driven images, or you're in the heart of conflict, or you're doing an essay about your hometown, you know, any of those can be incredibly successful if you really get at an essence and make people experience, when they look at your photographs, what you wanted to convey.
Very interesting. Thank you very much again. Nice to meet you.
You too.
Yeah, thank you, Jimena, for this question. I think we'll have to finish because we'll be already almost 2.5 hours. But yeah, I would say thank you to Mike really for giving us this additional 20 minutes. You will get more 2 hours with Mike on the 25th, so do apply. Really, I think you will learn a lot, and it will also be open to all alumni. Obviously 6 will be selected, but everyone can listen in as it's the usual with our workshops. So yeah, I think Mike, we will finish here. It was really a pleasure learning from you. And to all alumni, we will, I know you were asking already because some joined later or some had to leave earlier. We will publish this in a VII Community library. If by any chance you don't know how to access the VII Community webpage, because it is under login for our alumni, do write us at community@VII Academy. And if some of you are not on our Discord platform yet, please make sure to log in there as well. You should receive a newsletter tonight with a reminder for our mentorship open call, so you can see all the information there as well. But yeah, first, thank you, Mike. And then second, thank you to our partners, PhotoWings as well. It's such a pleasure to work with them always. So I think we can really finish this session and see you, Mike, and all of the alumni in 2 weeks' time.
Just thank you, Nika. That was really well done. And Susie Katz, if you are there, I miss hanging out with you. Thank you for making this happen, supporting this. And it's a pleasure to see you all. I hope to see many of you down the road. It is life.
Hi, Mike. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah.
Thank you, Susie. And thank you, Kim and Taylor, obviously, from the PhotoWings team. And thank you to everyone that joined. I hope you really enjoyed it. And we'll chat more about editing on Discord tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.